My name's Doug Dangler. I'm part of the DMC, Digital Media Collective, which was really started by the very fine Lori McAllister before she absconded to MIT. And we meet once a month, roughly, to discuss digital projects and digital initiatives at Ohio State. Hopefully you're seeing our emails and notices in OSU Today, things like that. Please consider coming to some of our other events. And today's event, set up very kindly by Amy McCrory, is Karen Diaz. And Karen Diaz is an associate professor and head of teaching and learning for the Ohio State University Libraries, as well as the leader of the OSU storytelling team, a crack commando team of storytellers available for your next party. She's taught digital storytelling in workshops and classrooms, and with fellow librarian Ann Fields, has co-authored Fostering Community Through Digital Storytelling, a guide for academic libraries. Welcome, Karen Diaz.
Thanks, Doug.
So first, Karen, could you define digital storytelling for us? Give us an idea of what it is exactly that you're working on and that kind of stuff.
Yes, that's a good question because it's a term that's used a lot these days, and it's used to mean a lot of different things. I've heard it used to describe gaming. I've heard it to describe blogging, all sorts of things. What we teach, however, is very specifically one form of digital storytelling, which is the creation of a 3 to 5 minute video that focuses on the personal point of view. And so we are encouraging people to tell their own stories. We teach people how to write stories, how to think about writing stories. We teach the technology that's required to put the story together. We're working with people that are not actors, and so one of the beautiful things about this form of storytelling is that you don't have to be a good actor to put one together.
Okay. So I like to imagine that as a child, you carried around pictures and told stories about them, you know, complete with sound effects, things like that. That's how you got into digital storytelling.
No.
Is that, no, okay. Darn. So how did you get into digital storytelling? What's your background in this area?
So back in 2004, my colleague Ann Fields found out about this Center for Digital Storytelling and about the workshops that Joe offers. And we had been talking about different ways of telling the library story. At that point in time, we were going through a lot of changes in the library system. We were planning for a major renovation of this large campus library. Like a lot of professions, librarianship with the technology changes has been doing a lot of soul searching and a lot of changing and a lot of trying to figure out how to adapt. We firmly believed that we had really good things to offer even in this changing environment, but we weren't sure how we should be talking about that. And this seemed like a really good opportunity to figure out how to do some of that storytelling. So Ann and I went off to this workshop in Asheville, North Carolina, and learned from Joe Lambert how to do digital storytelling. We actually worked on a story together that was kind of about the angst we were feeling at that time with all the changes that we were facing. And Joe really gave us a great way of turning it into a story and not just a straight description of what was happening. And so we came back very excited about the fact that we thought we'd found a really great way for libraries to tell their stories. But it became apparent really quickly that we were not prepared to run these workshops ourselves. While we had learned the technology there, it's one thing to learn it with a lot of help, and it's another thing to then turn around and teach it to people. So we quickly linked up with what was then the Learning Technologies group and formed a partnership with them. And so together we have worked on different aspects of the storytelling. So there's the technology part that we lean heavily on them for, and then the storytelling part that we feel that we can bring to the table. The technology's changed a lot over the years, and some of it's gotten easier, so it's a good thing because our group has changed a lot over the years too. We kind of keep bringing in partners and losing partners, so but it's always good when we have a combination of skills of storytelling and technology.
You talked about bringing in partners and changing them. Tell me about some of the trends that you've seen in that, areas that have maybe picked up digital storytelling more, or the ones that have moved away from it. What kind of trends have you seen?
So with the faculty that we have worked with, we've seen a number of people from education come in, and digital storytelling actually is very important in the field of education, both K through 12 and higher ed. So there's a lot of interest there in learning about it. We have had people from the sciences. We would love to see more people from the sciences. One of the things that we think is so great about this medium is that it allows people who might have different specialties and who might not understand each other in professional venues actually be able to communicate about their work with each other. But I would say education's probably been the biggest area that we've seen people.
Now, you've talked about some of your reasons for why you like digital storytelling and why you think it's valuable. Tell me about specifically promoting it in a university setting. Mm-hmm. And like you said, bringing in people from the sciences. What's your goal for promoting it here?
Mm-hmm. So that was one of the things that I think was so helpful with our partnership with the Learning Technologies Group, is because they're very campus focused, and it really allowed us to start thinking much more broadly about what to do with this. There are so many layers of how digital storytelling is useful in an academic environment. It's hard to name all of them, but I mentioned the idea of this interdisciplinary work. I mean, this is a trend we're seeing in higher education now, is that more and more people are being called upon to work with each other and across disciplines. And digital storytelling is a great way to perhaps introduce people to each other and to help each other understand the purpose of the work that they're doing, the passion behind what they're doing, the reasons they're doing it. For students, it's also a very important skill. Increasingly we think of students coming to campus as being highly adept with technology and able to manipulate technology, and often they are pretty good at it, but digital storytelling requires not only technical skills, it requires writing skills, it requires visual skills, it requires maybe software that people haven't ever used before, and thinking about things that they can do that they have not used with some of their other technology. So it's a great way for students to develop skills around understanding all of the visual information that's coming into them every day. If they have the opportunity to produce some of that work, they're much more critical about what they're seeing, and they're much more able to judge what might have gone into how things were made. So it's kind of important on a couple levels, I think.
Okay. So one last question, and then we're going to see some examples of the things that are produced in your workshops. Tell me a little bit more about the details of the workshops. What could someone who goes to a workshop expect to happen during it?
Okay. The workshops have run for 3 days. We do a 3-day intensive, so 8 hours a day. In the workshops, we cover what are called the 7 steps of digital storytelling, or the 7 elements of digital storytelling, and I can take a look at those in just a minute. We run a story circle, and the story circle is the part where people start working out what the idea of their story is going to be. This is an important piece because often when people are telling personal stories, it's a little hard to get that out, especially if it's really personal. It may take a bit of effort for people to get the courage to talk about it. And the story circle provides sort of an informal way for people to get a little more comfortable with that. The other important piece of the story circle is that then you also have a group reacting to what you're saying and helping you understand what are the really engaging parts of your story, and so that what you end up with is something that is authentic to what you want to say, but is also engaging to others. Another piece that we have introduced into our workshop is something we call a visual selection workshop. So you'll see with the examples that we're using photos and audio to put together, and we've seen a lot of people struggle with how to use photos in their stories, and some people think they need a literal picture for everything that they're talking about, and so we help them think a little bit more abstractly about what visuals they might want to use with their story. We actually run the recording in the workshops so that we can record in a higher quality environment. Most people can record on their phones or anything, but the quality of it might not be great. And so if we can do it in an environment where we have better technology, the sound will come out better. We teach photo editing, so if people have old photos that they need to spruce up a little bit or something they need to crop to use in their story, we go over that. And then we teach the movie editing piece, and so that they can learn how to add motion and transitions and some action to the photos that they have. Sure. And finally, one piece that's become important to us as librarians teaching this and being involved in it is that we also introduce the concept of thinking about copyright and how to use items that are either free from copyright restrictions or that are licensed under Creative Commons licensing.
Okay.
So.
Well, then let's switch over to watching a couple of these.
Great.
And I think you're going to start off with one that you've produced yourself. Is that right?
Yes. So
Okay.
this is one that I did back in 2007, and it's kind of a self-reflection on what all of this working with digital storytelling has meant to me personally and professionally.
Okay.
When I was a baby, I learned language through stories. As I grew, stories taught me to read, developed my sense of humor, shaped my understanding of God, gave me a moral compass, and helped me begin to grapple with human nature. At 12, I had to look up the word rape in the dictionary because of a story. In college, I got a degree from studying stories, language, themes, metaphors, characters, humor, tragedy, choices, patterns, stories on film, all added up to give me a broad perspective and critical thinking skills. Imagine that. Somehow, though, I never got what I know about stories now. What I know now is that we all have stories to tell. They're significant. They can be shared. I can be part of my culture's storytelling dynamic. I'm a daughter, a sister, a wife, a mom, a friend, a professional, a citizen. All these parts of me can be stories and can help me build community with others in each of those realms. Even academic interests can be shared in story and can help me build connections with students that facts alone can't. The Center for Digital Storytelling taught me how to tell you my story about stories. I learned to struggle with my script, to keep it short but sharp. I shared it with a group of colleagues who helped me figure out what the point of my story was and the most engaging way to make that point. I had pictures in my mind of what illustrated my thoughts, then found old pictures and made new ones to represent these thoughts. I digitized them and used software to turn them into something that flows and moves. I searched for music to help you feel a connection to what I'm telling you and the mood that I'm trying to convey. I experimented and edited to make my story what you're hearing today. Some parts of this process were challenging for me. I thought that if you knew that stories could be about anything, that even grown-ups can have pictures in their stories, that they can be funny or sad, that it's okay to bring emotion and reveal some of your humanity, even if it's your work you're talking about, then you would want to tell me a story about yourself, something you know, what you care about, why you do what you do. Then maybe I can know you a little better and learn or understand or care about something new myself.
The next story that we are going to look at is called Pink by Beth Cattleman, who is a curator here in the libraries. And I think Beth has captured what Ann and I sort of saw as an original vision of what libraries could do with digital storytelling. She tells us about a collection that she's worked with here. And actually, one thing I'll also say about that is my colleague Nancy Courtney, who's here today, and I are working on we're teaching an undergraduate course on digital storytelling, and we're working on changing it for this fall to actually make use of some of our special collections, and we're hoping to get some other student stories that are of interest like this too.
Okay.
So.
I know that it's pink. That's what Emily Corey said as we were gathering up her father's papers that had been donated to the Lawrence and Lee Theater Research Institute. Emily is the daughter of Jeff Corey, an actor who appeared in numerous films like True Grit, In Cold Blood, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and Little Big Man, and TV shows like Star Trek. While Jeff had an impressive acting career, it is not the crux of his story. You see, Jeff lived in Hollywood at a time when many writers and performers were under attack by the House Un-American Activities Committee for being suspected communists. Paranoia pervaded the industry, and many lived in fear of receiving the dreaded summons to appear before the committee. As a result of those hearings, more than 300 artists lost their livelihood. Jeff received his summons in 1951. He appeared before the committee and refused to name names, so he was blacklisted and couldn't work as an actor for the next 12 years. In order to support his family, Jeff began to give acting lessons out of his home. He taught Jack Nicholson, James Dean, Leonard Nimoy, Barbra Streisand, Carol Burnett, and numerous others. He became known as the best acting teacher in Hollywood. I know that it's pink. The summons was the pink piece of paper that Emily referred to. I turned over a stack of papers, and there it was. As I stood there holding the document, it hit me. This piece of paper represents fear, betrayal, a change in one family's whole way of life. It also represents resilience and determination. Wow, I thought, we're a theater research institute, but we're so much more. Yes, we do have plenty of resources for those interested in the performing arts, but we also have resources for those interested in all sorts of subjects. A public history student who worked with the Jeff Corey collection sent me an email. How is the Jeff Corey collection? That project was by far the most interesting work I have ever been a part of. I was just telling someone about a HUAC transcript I read. Unbelievable stuff. Unbelievable? Maybe. But these documents represent real people who touched and lived them. Yes, Jeff's summons was pink, but it symbolizes a whole colorful story.
And then the last story that we're going to look at is one that was done by a faculty member at the OSU campus in Worcester, ATI, the Ag Technic Institute. He's a soil scientist, and he has a very fun way of telling us about the work that he does.
I know some things about plants and soil. I'm an agronomist. So when my wife came to me last year and said, I want a lawn free of weeds, I know what it takes to turn our mix of grass and broadleaf weeds into a green lawn. Established grass is very competitive with weeds when conditions are right. The pH of the soil needs to be adjusted with lime. 1 pound of nitrogen should be applied per 1,000 square feet, 3 or 4 times per year. Keep the grass mowed at a 3-inch height. Spray 2,4-D or dicamba herbicide to control broadleaves. A perfect recipe for a beautiful lawn any homeowner would be proud of. But something inside of me resists doing what my wife wants. Not out of contempt or spite, but something else. We will lose the clover, I offer as a reason not to have 1/3 of an acre of beautiful lawn. I know, it's ugly, and it makes our lawn look poorly kept, she effectively counters. She is right. It does look poorly kept. But I'm opposed to killing clover out of a deep respect for the plant and its family. Clover is a legume in the family Fabaceae, which means it fixes nitrogen from the atmosphere. Not only does it fix its own nitrogen, but it shares with other plants. In my book, a weed is a weed because it steals. Weeds steal light, nutrients, and water. Clover doesn't steal, it shares. I cannot kill a charitable plant. Besides, bunnies love clover. And what would our wild bunny eat if the clover were gone? Yet I will not choose clover over my wife's happiness. So I walk over to the clover just before sunset and apologize for what I'm about to do. Clover seems to consider my dilemma a moment and replies, "Don't worry, I'm a weed. I'll be back next year." Positive mental attitude. That's another thing I like about clover.
All right, so now I think that we will have you talk to Joe Lambert.
Great. Joe Lambert is the director of the Center for Digital Storytelling in Berkeley, California, and he is the person who has inspired the program here at OSU and taught us the techniques that we're using. Joe travels the globe and brings his news of digital storytelling everywhere, and in fact is pretty recently back from Europe. So, Joe, you were just at the 5th International Digital Storytelling Conference. How did that go and what all happened there?
You know, it was in Ankara, Turkey, and Ankara, Turkey is a fabulous environment for having said conference. It's a cultural crossroads for about 100,000 years. And, you know, we were hosted there by actually a Department of Communication. And part of the idea was to have a group of people from that larger Middle Eastern community engaging in digital storytelling and kind of expanding the work in that region. A few years ago, we were in Lillehammer, Norway, just at the time the Arab Spring was happening. And we all felt that that was a wonderful example of the way democracy and media kind of intersect. And we felt it was important to kind of have our community go in that direction to engage, you know, communities in Islamic countries with how digital storytelling could be used as part of the greater project of democracy. About 150 of us gathered in this environment with some 60 plus presentations. What struck me was that in the world that this has grown into, it continues to expand in so many different areas, interests and disciplines and possibilities. It's certainly much more than an educational technology tool, and it's become really a tool for human rights activism, a tool for public health engagement, for work in healthcare, for work in immigration and citizenship. And, you know, the presentations were really impressive. Like, one of my favorites was of a Maori youth educator from New Zealand who performed the haka prior to his presentation. So he brought a little bit of Kiwi Maori culture into the conference. And, you know, was doing some extraordinary work with local intergenerational projects between youth, elders in the community. And there seemed there was three big themes around the use of indigenous communities with this work. And it's something we've certainly done a lot in North America with both First Nation communities in Canada and Native American communities in the United States. But it's very gratifying to see these cultures have these long histories of oral transmission, connect to the work of digital storytelling and take ownership of the work of digital storytelling. So that was really exciting. And, you know, I mean, I could go on and it felt like this movement has only just begun. And just like my having been at it for about a year, it really feels like it's a tool that a lot of communities are finding is just right. I mean, they're not quite up to full media production in terms of engaging each and every citizen. The digital storytelling is well beyond powerful. And this gives a way to share stories, business,
Thanks, Joe. You have worked with a lot of different projects in a lot of different communities, and you mentioned some of them: immigration, healthcare. I know you've worked with a lot of just social communities as well, and I wondered if you could tell us about one or two different projects that stand out in the work of the Center for Digital Storytelling.
Well, the work that really has led us in the last 7-8 years is the work that's called Silent Speaks. Silent Speaks is a focus on ending gender-based violence. It grew out of the work of my colleague Amy Hill. Amy is a public health professional that worked in the domestic violence shelter, kind of training and support world in California, and was also a media person. And she found digital storytelling and found that it was extremely useful for working with people that are affected by violence, to kind of tell their stories and to help educate the people that support them about the issues that they must face. That work has really gone all over the world, with projects as far away as the Congo and Uganda with child soldiers, to work in South Africa around the relationship between domestic violence and the spread of HIV/AIDS. A lot of work that ended up in family environments related to foster care and foster youth. That work we've done in several states and again across Canada. And most recently is an amazing social media project. It's about the stigma attached to HIV/AIDS, not just with women, but with men and women around in the Asian Pacific Island communities. And that's taken us to Guam and Hawaii and New York, and we'll be going to Cleveland this summer as part of that project. And they have a great social media campaign. This is the Asian Pacific Wellness Center out of San Francisco, is the kind of point agency, but it's a national SAMHSA, or the federal support for community behavioral and mental health project that we're quite excited about. The way that stories are being used, really, engage an entire community about how they look at the issue of HIV/AIDS within that community. But there's just lots of great stuff. And ironically, the big work I'm doing right now is with science and technology centers. And I was in your town, last October doing work when the Association of Science and Technology Centers had their national conference in Columbus there. And I've been working through one of the foundations that supports that work, called the Noise Foundation, here in California, to do leadership training around the use of digital storytelling, and also to capture stories of community engagement and the processes of community engagement by science museums. And obviously to get to play in these wonderful informal science centers has been tremendous, and it has me talking to a lot of scientists, which is not something I usually get to do. You guys are a little more fortunate that you get to play in the multiple disciplines of the way learning happens, and but this has been fun and interesting for us.
Great. So you were also here a little over a year ago to do a workshop for us on mobile digital storytelling, and I know you've been doing a lot more with that, and I wondered if you could talk about that and sort of the emphasis on kind of a different form of storytelling, that of place, and how you work with that.
Yeah, I think like everybody, with the kind of idea that media was moving on to the cell phone, and the cell phone was becoming more of the kind of actively used, or mobile devices are the more actively used communication as well as computing devices. More than a decade ago, we began to look at projects that we thought would work for storytelling and mobile applications. And place-based storytelling, or what we called story mapping, was our emphasis and interest in that. Obviously, with the coming of the app world on the iPhone, and really, at least in the United States and a few other countries, the ubiquity of the iPhone, iPod, iPad world, we saw that there was just going to be a major tectonic shift in the way people think about where stories are told. I don't know about you guys, but I was watching the coverage of the Oklahoma disaster yesterday. And it was extraordinary, right, that at this moment people are able to kind of capture endless amounts of data and really human stories from all these different angles. And it's almost like the news operations don't even know how to deal with it. And I'm jumping into, YouTube to see stuff that I can't see on CNN because it hadn't broken on CNN yet, and for me, this idea that we as citizens can tell the stories that we witness ourselves in a way that we learn how to tell them better is certainly what participatory media projects are about. And my specific thing has been taking the workshop model that we have and taking it out into the street. So that, when we did the workshop in Istanbul a couple of years ago to begin this kind of iPhone workshop process, it meant we could walk through the streets of Istanbul and hold the various components of the workshop in restaurants and cafes in the middle of the Grand Bazaar and kind of be in the world even as we're doing the work of digital storytelling. And obviously, the photographic instrument of the iPhone to me is so tremendous. It's an incredibly cool thing to work with. It's not the best camera in the world, but the things you can do with any one shot is so profoundly creative that I also think it brings this emphasis on photography to the foreground of the work of digital storytelling. And I like that a lot. And it means that people are being creative. And what you said earlier about people not illustrating their story with a noun. Every time they say a noun, they show the picture of the noun, that they begin to think about relationships and metaphor and symbolism and kind of interrelationships that show that kind of any number of images can help you tell a story about any subject, and you can find those images wherever you are. And I certainly enjoyed doing it at Columbus because it demonstrated just how many stories are sitting on the campus. I remember the story by the one guy, about kind of him and his mom sitting at one table and the kind of decisions that parents and children come into that world, kind of seeing lives change. And he could capture around one table out on the quad a narrative of kind of my life changed. And many lives change on college campuses. And the idea that we're marking those stories, hopefully mapping them at some point is very exciting.
Great, well, thanks. So do we want to open up questions?
Yeah, I think so. Get questions. We promised that you would all be able to ask. So what questions do you have for Karen or for Joe Lambert?
If you have questions, Karen, could you repeat them?
Okay.
Okay, Joe, one of the things that I was interested in is where you see the future going, considering how fast things have occurred in the past 5 years in the ability of people to produce their own stories.
Could you hear that, Joe?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
You can answer that.
Well, I think one of the things that we're all realizing is, I remember when I started 20 years ago, the number of people that could edit on video on a computer was about 50, meaning on the whole planet. There were 50 people that knew how to edit video on a computer. And, by 2001, there were 4 million in the United States. Somebody had done research saying there are 4 million. Fast forward to now, and I'm guessing there's 50 million people who have made a slideshow for a birthday party or a video for somebody they know, and the idea that this is somehow fancy in the current era is gone. Meaning implicit in the way that Microsoft here's an example. Last week, the Story app came out, and who produced the Story app? Disney. So when the Disney Corporation goes into the personal storytelling business with an app to help you mix the images that you have to tell good stories about your children, and Disney is all in that space, right? They entertain our children, but they recognize that participation in making your own story is a business model. When Disney is in it, the world is already on the other side of this as a paradigm, arguably, at least within the kind of people that deal with Disney, which is virtually all of us, right, have to deal with Disney at some point. So to me, that idea that in 5 years, anything we're about is teaching technology it's just done. I mean, we're not teaching technology to anybody, really. I mean, obviously, there will always be some people on the backside of this wave that we're pushing across some line of communicative skill within these tool sets. But really, we're going back more and more to story. And the hard part of life is making meaning. And there's no other work but sitting and reflecting and working through, and ideally with other people, whether that's your therapist or your best friends, or a story circle at the Ohio State University. And to me, the work of story just will not stop, because the more media there is in the world, the more our own voices don't seem adequate against the great tide of all the media it's created. And so I think one of the things we'll still need is good story coaches, good story facilitators, people who can help us think through story, and all of us have to kind of go again and again at a deeper level into what is this about? How does this make us more healthy? How does this make us more sane? And how does this help our communities? How does this help solve the problems that we face as communities? And to me, that's the work for the next 200 years. Forget about the next 5.
Thank you. Other questions? Uh-huh.
I'm trying to form my question, so it's going to be a little rambling perhaps. I'm very interested in, I'm speaking louder enough, I hope. I'm very interested in what you were saying about capturing stories in public spaces like coffee houses, for example. When you do that, do you concern yourself with what you just mentioned about knowing how to tell the story, or do you capture the stories sort of randomly and then look into how to tell the story?
Yeah, I mean, I should clarify that the idea of the way we're doing the storytelling is not so much that we're doing a documentation project, right? I mean, because what I hear implicit in your question is that we're going out to document what we see in a journalistic fashion, and therefore the stories are changed by what we see. Is that not right?
No, that's not my question.
Okay.
And I have not said it well. I'm glad that you mentioned documenting, but please go on. Please go on.
Well, again, what we do think changes, the main reason we're out in the world is to let the environment that we're in inform some aspect of the story we're telling. So inevitably, like on the Ohio State campus, when we walked around looking at the campus and taking pictures, there were things about the campus that woke up certain kinds of stories. But in other ways, people were still telling the exact same story they would have told if they had been sitting in the room without walking out of the room, and they were just illustrating that story with visuals that they pulled off the campus environment. And in that way, I don't think we can say that the physical environment changed the core narrative or what they wanted to talk about and how they were talking about it. It only helped change the way the visual treatment happened. And to me, that was cool enough, meaning it was useful enough for people to get off of searching for images in Google to look for some image of the thing that they were talking about, and instead sort of awaken to the idea that if they look at the world they're in, it's filled with metaphor, and they can illustrate any story they have with the metaphors that are readily available. And so that part was what we were shifting. However, there are some projects that are being done where it really is about performance investigation, and we're doing a sort of performance investigation project around waterways as part of our Desire Pass project, which is part of our innovation center called Story Lab, where we will be working with citizens to do stories that come out of the waterway in Seattle and upstate New York and the New Orleans, Louisiana coastline, the stories that are coming out of those places, and it will be much more kind of informed by place and by the ghosts that sit in place, and those projects are always great.
Yes, and I can reiterate, I can think of 2 stories that were done on this campus with that workshop that Joe is talking about that really had nothing to do about this campus at all. One was someone who was dealing with an illness and was feeling very confined by it, and found a lot of metaphors of confinement on the campus. And someone else was a very adventurous story, and it was kind of the opposite of sort of the adventure in their mind, and how the place offered metaphors for what they were thinking about of their own professional adventures and growth and thinking. And then some of the stories, like Joe said, there was the one of a person who's a staff person now, but had been a student here, and a very specific place had done a lot for him on this campus. So I think place means a couple different things in that respect.
Did that help?
Yes, thank you.
Joel.
Yeah, we've produced about 300 stories from our students at OSU, and we were wondering what to do with them. And I'm wondering, from your experience with projects like Simon Speaks, how do you curate the stories in a way that effectively reach an audience? Where is the audience for the stories beyond the stories?
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting part of the digital storytelling movement that it's the kind of media that is so process centric that we always seem to think about audience a little bit after the fact. The exception is projects like The Silent Speaks, where inherent in people's participation is the stories are going to be integrated into a curriculum or an organizing drive or an advocacy drive or a larger communication effort. And we certainly get X number of those processes where, we intend that every story we make will serve some communication need that was predefined. And the people invited to the workshop have signed off saying, yes, I want my story to be part of this campaign. But usually we find that it's true, the same thing was true when I was a theater producer, is that for every 10 shows I produced, one was a hit, which thank God it paid for the other 9. And we found the same thing when we're doing this work in digital storytelling, is that one story comes out of a group of 10 that just completely captures your imagination about what the form can do and what the story's about, and it hits the theme in a very strong and powerful way. So inevitably that story ends up being the one that kind of has a viral quality to it, not in a YouTube viral sense, but in the sense of that story will travel to all of the conferences, be talked about by a lot of people, be connected to by a lot of people. I'm saying goodbye to my daughter. Come give me a kiss. See you, baby.
If I could follow up on that just a little bit. At Ohio State, one of the initiatives that you're probably all familiar with is Digital First, which has a lot to do with iTunes U. And that's an archival space that is open to many people, especially academic. And there are various collections on there, of which one is Writer's Talk, which I produce. And I would welcome anybody who has a story that would like to have featured there, talk about it, especially the students, to show the work being done. I'd be happy to cover it. I'd be happy to broadcast it. We've got a couple of radio outlets. And then there's a guy in the back who you may or may not know from The Lantern. And I'm going to say maybe The Lantern would like to do some coverage. I'm just always throwing other people on the fire. I'm sorry, Dan.
Don't apologize. I was actually going to jump in if you didn't throw me out there. The Lantern is always looking, especially for student-produced content. And I think a lot of students still think of that as it has to be a story written for the newspaper. And increasingly that's not the case. We're looking for video content. We're looking for digital audio content. The students have full editorial control. So even if I think something that one of your students or one of you submit is fantastic, if the editors at The Lantern or the producers at Buckeye TV don't agree, that's their decision. But Buckeye TV, the student-run TV station, is now part of the Lantern Media Group formally, and I can assure you We are looking for video content submissions from all over campus. So if there's anyone here, any of your students, any of your colleagues around campus, are looking for an outlet, I have some business cards, I'll leave them on the table back here. Please don't hesitate to get in touch, and I'll put you in touch with the students who are on both sides, not being paid to make these decisions. And I'd be happy to serve as kind of the initial contact for any of that. So thank you very much.
That actually brings up a question that I have, in that in digital storytelling, a lot of it that you've mentioned has been visual, and I'm particularly interested in audio production, and I'm wondering what kind of space you see for things that are, pure audio, like This American Life, where you've transferred the visual descriptions into audio to make it work like that. Because there are a lot of times when I can get people to listen to stuff at times when they wouldn't be able to watch it. You're driving in a car or something like that. We've got all kinds of moments like that, and I'm curious about your reaction to that. Joe?
Well, I mean, the irony is that I think a lot of people, because I don't think we've been able to entrain people in sophisticated visual treatments in these kind of do-it-yourself free-up workshops. A lot of people listen to the writing that comes out of these workshops and the audio recording and say, that would be better as radio, frankly. It's almost like closing your eyes and listening to the storyteller tell the story. We get a kind of richer way of seeing what they're saying inside our own brains. And there have been, we helped start a lot of work in public broadcasting, not in the United States, ironically, but first with the BBC in the UK, and then through the BBC there was interest across the Commonwealth. So in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, South Africa, there were projects that came up, and a lot of the broadcast interest in the story circle to piece of writing to recording interest was as radio, and they were used as radio interstitials, little pieces that get stuck into the spaces between programming in many of these different environments. And we haven't done as much of that as we'd like. Certainly, we're always in conversations with StoryCorps and with PBS affiliates, and we end up, getting radio pieces done about the processes that we're working on. Again, I think the sky's the limit in terms of somebody being smart enough to amalgamate the material. The website that we're partnered with currently that we like the way it works is called Cowbird. Cowbird was started by Jonathan Harris out here on the West Coast, and a journalist named Annie Corial, who was a New York Times journalist for a long time. And it's really a stunning visual interface, cowbird.com. But they made the audio capacity work, and so it's often you're looking at one or two or more images, but listening to the storyteller talk. And we like that. We've been doing workshops called snapshot stories that are single images in which the person then tells the story behind the image. And we find that a very effective form. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that kind of audio-based kind of focus, because in some ways it's the great piece of writing and storytelling that awakens these pieces. And sometimes it's better that you're not looking at a sequential series of images flashing by your eyes. So there's lots of possibilities.
Are there other questions?
I just have one comment I'd like to make to Joe. While you were here last year at one of our local conferences, I purchased a book from you and asked you to address it to an Eagle Scout that was doing stories of World War II veterans. And I had a chance to meet him about a couple months after you were here. And it was interesting in that as most students, he was, I think, a little bit overly aggressive in the number of stories that he was trying to collect. He was trying to get 1,000 World War II veterans. And most of these were interview types of things that he was doing. And I gave him your book because I thought some of these stories could be converted into video, and he was starting to do that, so he was extremely appreciative of getting some additional comments. But one of the things that kind of struck me was that in his enthusiasm, the reason he chose 1,000 was because he had heard that 1,000 veterans were dying per day in the World War II era. And I mentioned to him that he might want to expand his horizons a little bit to get some other veterans story. And I noticed about 6 months ago he did convert to encompass more than just the World War II veterans. But I was very impressed with his dedication to doing that, and he now has his Eagle Scout. So we do appreciate your involvement with assisting with that.
That's great. That's fabulous. Yeah, I mean, the work with veterans has been a critical part of our work for almost this whole period, and I just think it's fabulous work. I mean, I think capturing the stories that often do get silenced, as much as this is a big topic and we talk about Veterans Affairs, inevitably there are people who are sitting behind some story, particularly that greatest generation, that they never shared. Nobody really sat down to listen and listen deeply, and it's critical because the sense of what service means, learning through them, is very powerful for all of us.
Yeah, one of the things that kind of, as I was talking to him, he said that one of his fellow scouts was interviewing a veteran of the Vietnam War, and he was asking him about how he felt when he came back. And he said the first thing he did was take off his uniform and just kind of didn't talk about it at all. And the student was about 13, and he didn't understand the concept of what the environment was back in the 60s with the Vietnam War. And that was kind of interesting to me, that generation gap just didn't understand the different situations in the historical perspective of things.
Yeah, but it's clear to me that this Afghanistan generation right now, the Iraq and Afghanistan, are facing some of the same issues that people don't know that we're at war. We are at war. We're in a war in Afghanistan right now. So the idea of people coming back and people like, so what, is still going on. And I think that's all the more a reason we need to do, obviously, the historic work. But we need to also be witnessing the lives of these young men and women who've gone over to serve. We're coming back right now into a world where, half the people they talk to have forgotten that we're at war, right? And so to me, that's an interesting challenge for any number of us to figure out ways to do that. And every VA hospital in America has a group of people that nobody's paying any attention to. They're virtually homeless, right? So it's tragic.
Dan?
Joe, I was wondering what you think about the continued attempts to commercialize digital storytelling. I mean, you need to look no further than, I guess it was yesterday, where Yahoo buys Tumblr for $1.1 billion. What are your thoughts on this? And do you think it helps more than it hurts more than it helps, or that doesn't really have much of an effect?
No, I mean, I think anything that allows people to have voice is positive, and I think the entire explosion of social media has given platforms to new people in new ways, et cetera, et cetera. The business models of these things are obviously to sell up. You start getting one of these companies not really to make money, to sell it to somebody who wants to get you out of those spaces. I don't know why I didn't think of that 20 years ago. I wouldn't be working now, I guess, if I had. But the idea is, for me, the environment that invites considered reflection is going to be the real winner. We have a media ecology that's about reactiveness. This is both in our official media, pundits shouting at each other on the news, or Fox versus MSNBC or whatever. but also in the kind of world where we're tweeting or we're kind of just reacting to things and throwing it out there. I think as a society we have to have more people thinking before they talk, considering what they're going to say before they say it. And as much as the media invites us to be reactive, I think we need to create environments that allow us to be reflective. And that's a real trick. And I do think that there are going to be some tools, and again, Disney coming into this space both scares me and excites me. I think there are going to be more tools that are going to be about like slow media, right? It's like we have fast food and fast media. I think just as we're all learning to eat a little better to stay fit, we're going to also have to learn to use media, social media, in a way that's considerate. And that to me is a turning. And it won't be for everybody, obviously, still, but I think we want to encourage that in the same way we want to encourage people to be conscious about the way they eat, conscious about the way they use energy, and conscious about the way they both consume and create media. And that's it.
Spoken like a good librarian there, too. We talk about that a lot.
Anything else? Any other questions, comments, requests for story help from Karen, who will come to your house whenever, help you with your stories? No? Okay. Well, if do you have something else you wanted to cover? Okay. So I think probably what we'll do now is thank Joe Lambert very much for being here. And Karen Diaz for being here as well, and Amy in putting this together. This is Alex Everett, who is advertised to be here today, so you can all run up to him afterwards and pepper him with questions about his very cool and expensive camera.
He was sitting on the wrong side of the camera today, but
yeah,
an important part of our work right now.
So this will be archived and available at several locations that we'll probably advertise later, and part of it will be hopefully on Writers Talk on radio as well. So if anybody, welcome you to all stay around, ask questions, and we'll just get a lot less formal. All right, so thanks very much.